Sometimes the conflict arises even before the first word. He appears in the heavy air, in the silence that precedes the response, in the body that hardens without realizing it. It's as if something invisible person placed himself between two people, suspended, waiting just for a breath to turn into a storm. Have you ever felt this moment? At this point, it's not just an argument that's about to happen. Something more deep stirs. Old emotions awaken, defenses rise, and the heart begins to heal. Beat like he was being called to a battle he never wanted to fight. Oh, conflict is rarely just about the now. It carries echoes of the past and fears of the future. Most of us have learned that, when faced with this, we must react. Explain better. Speak louder. Defend your position. Prove you are right. But there is another way. One way, silent, almost imperceptible, which does not seek to win or convince. A path that goes through the conflict without fueling it. In lived Shintoism, not as a doctrine but as a sensitivity, it is understood that each human encounter creates an invisible field. In this field, words are neither weapons nor shields. They are seeds. Some harden the soil, others purify it. It all depends on which is chosen to plant when tension reaches its peak. There is a simple, short, almost disarming phrase that can be put exactly at this breaking point. It does not end the conflict by force. She does not silence the other. She does something rarer. It changes the spiritual climate of the moment, like an unexpected breeze that goes through a sultry day. When this phrase is said, something slows down. The impulse to attack loses strength. The need of winning begins to dissolve, not because someone gave in, but because the space between two was clean. The conflict for a moment becomes ungrounded. This video is an invitation to observe this moment more carefully, to realize that not all strength needs to push, and that some words are not useful to respond, but to purify. If you feel like there is something invisible guiding your days, especially in difficult times, stay here. Maybe this journey is exactly for you. When a conflict arises, something becomes contaminated. Not just the conversation, but the space. The air seems denser, gestures become stiff, thoughts repeat themselves like footsteps stuck in the mud. Even if no one raises their voice, something has already gone wrong. It's like water that it was moved too much and lost its transparency. There is an impurity that cannot be seen but can be felt. It doesn't just come from anger, nor just from fear. It is born from accumulation of unspoken words, of frustrated expectations, of old wounds that find an opening to return to the surface. Conflict is just the visible symptom of something that was already cloudy inside. Notice how, in these moments, the body reacts before the mind. The jaw contracts, a breathing shortens, the chest closes, the spirit moves away from the center and starts to revolve around of the defense. It's not a conscious choice, it's a reflection. As if something said, take cover, attack before you are attacked. But this reflex comes at a price. Every word spoken in this state carries the impurity forward. It spreads like smoke. Even when the conflict ends, something remains in the environment. A discomfort, a heavy silence, a feeling that nothing was actually resolved, just stopped. In modern life, we have been taught to treat conflict as something to be overcome, as a game of forces. Who argues best? Who resists the most? Who gives in last? But there are another way of seeing this moment, not as a battle, but as a sign, a warning of that something needs to be cleaned up before continuing. In the spiritual tradition linked to nature, it is understood that not everything can be resolved with action direct. Some situations call for a break, others ask for silence, and some ask purification, not a moral purification of right or wrong, but a clearing of the field invisible where relationships happen. Just as water in a river needs to flow to avoid rotting, emotions need to be passage. When they become dammed, they become heavy. The conflict arises precisely when there is no more flow. When the energy stops, it hardens and begins to hurt whoever it touches. Maybe that's why certain disagreements seem bigger than they really are. They only talk about the subject at hand. They talk about accumulation, of what was saved, then never found room to be dissolved. Before any response, before any argument, there is a precious moment, one point at which it is still possible to clean the space instead of contaminating it further. It's in this point that the silent path begins to reveal itself. And that's where a simple sentence said with the right intention, it can do more than long explanations ever could. Words are not born empty. Even the simplest ones carry intention, rhythm, and direction. Before being understood by the mind, they have already been felt by the body. One tone it can hurt before the meaning is understood. A break can calm down before anything or explanation exists. In conflict, this becomes even more evident. When we talk about winning, the word hardens. It becomes too straight, too sharp, too heavy. No matter how logical it is, it comes as pressure, and pressure generates resistance. This is how dialogues become invisible walls, where each sentence adds another layer of separation. But there is another type of word, a word that doesn't push, doesn't accuse, doesn't demand. It is not born from the rush to respond, but from the willingness to be present. This word does not try to control the outcome. She just places herself in space, like someone lighting a candle in a dark room without waiting for the darkness to ask permission to leave. On the spiritual path linked to nature, it is understood that speaking is a ritual act, not in formal sense, but in a living sense. Each word rearranges the surrounding field. She can shake or quiet, contaminate or purify, zoom in or out. Therefore, silence always it was considered as powerful as speech. Both shape the invisible. The phrase that crosses the conflict is not special because it is ancient or sacred. She is special because it comes from a different place within whoever says it. It does not arise from a wounded ego, nor from need to assert yourself. It arises from the recognition that that moment is greater than any argument. When spoken, this phrase does not ask for agreement. It does not require an immediate response. It simply creates space. And space is rare in conflicts. Space to breathe. Space for the other to exist without being pressured. Space for the spirit to return to the center. That's why often those who listen don't know how to explain the effect. It doesn't seem logical. It doesn't seem strategic. But something changes. The tone drops. The body relaxes. The urgency decreases. A conversation stops being a collision and becomes an encounter, even if imperfect. This is the difference between using words as tools and using them as presence. Tools are used to shape something external. Presence transforms the field where everything happens. And in conflict, transforming the field is more effective than trying to shape the other. There is an exact moment when this type of word finds passage. A brief moment, almost invisible, before the tension passes the return point. Recognize this moment is a form of deep listening, not from what is being said, but from what is about to break. It is at this threshold that the phrase finds its true power, not as an answer, but as gesture, not as a defense, but as an opening. And when that happens, the conflict no longer follows the same path as before. It begins to bend, gently, in another direction. Every conflict has a birth point, a delicate moment that has not yet turned fire, but it is no longer just a spark. It's a brief moment, easy to miss because happens inside, before the tone of voice increases, before the word crossed, before the decision to attack or close down. This instant can be recognized by the body. Breathing changes. The impulse to respond comes too quickly. There is an almost physical desire to interrupt the other, to explain oneself, to defend yourself. This is where many get lost, because they believe that this impulse is a sign of urgency, when in fact it is a request for a pause. The right time to use the phrase is not after everything has been said. It's not at the height of anger when the field is saturated. And it's not long before either, when there's still no tension enough for her to pass. The moment is preliminary, a narrow portal between the control and lack of control. At this point, the conflict could still change direction, like a river before the waterfall. A small detour there alters the entire course ahead. Using the phrase at this moment requires presence. It requires realizing that you don't need to respond immediately, that you don't need to prove anything now, that preserving the countryside is more important than winning the speech. This is not weakness. It's sensitivity. It is reading the invisible. When said at that moment, the phrase does not sound like evasion. It sounds like consciousness. She signals without explaining that something is being taken care of, and even if the other doesn't understand rationally, something in him recognizes this. The conflict feels that it has lost ground. There is silent learning here. If this idea resonates with you, it is a sign that something inside he has already woken up. Because only those who are tired of repeated conflicts begin to look for the instant before rupture. Only those who realize the energetic cost of discussions begin to value the moment when it is still possible to choose differently. The phrase is not used to silence the other, used to mark time, as if to say, without harsh words, let's breathe this moment before moving on. And often that's enough so that the conversation does not go to places from which it is difficult to return. This simple gesture protects something precious, your own spiritual integrity. Instead of being dragged by the emotional current, you anchor yourself, not to resist, but not to be taken. And this anchoring changes everything. The secret it is not in the sentence itself, but in the listening that precedes it. Listening to the body, from climate, of what is about to be lost if no one interrupts the automatic flow. When this recognition happens, the phrase finds fertile soil, and there, even in the midst of tension, something begins to reorganize itself in silence. When the phrase is said at the right time, something changes in the other person before they even realize it, consciously. It's not a change of opinion. It's not agreement. It's a change more subtle, which happens beneath language. The body listens before the mind reacts. The first effect is almost imperceptible. The tension loses rigidity, like a knot that is not undone by force, but which loosens on its own when the pressure stops. The other one can continue seriously. You may even maintain the same position, but you are no longer in the same internal state. Something in him he stopped fighting. This happens because conflict needs resistance to exist. He feeds on clear opposition, direct conflict, me against you. When this structure does not maintain, the conflict remains without a defined form. He begins to disperse, looking for where to stay, support, and can't find it. At that moment, the other's mind goes into slight suspension. It's not confusion. It's a break. One rare space in which the automatic response does not come immediately. The tone of voice tends to download. Sentences become shorter. Sometimes there is a silence that was not anticipated. This silence is not defeat. It's reorganization. Internally, the defense system begins to relax. The body understands that it does not need attack nor flee. And when that happens, emotions that were compressed find passage. These are not always pleasant emotions. They can be tiredness, frustration, sadness. But when they emerge, they humanize the moment. That's why often after the sentence the other person changes the subject, sighs, or it simply says something unexpected. Not because he was convinced, but because he got out of the way of combat. The conversation stops being an arena and becomes an uneven terrain, however more alive. This effect is similar to the wind changing direction in an open field. Nothing was pushed. Nothing was held back. There was just enough space for movement follow another path. And once that happens, it's hard to get back to exactly the right point. Previous. The most curious thing is that the other person rarely attributes this change to the sentence. He may think that he cooled down, that it wasn't worth continuing, or that he lost the will to discuss. But in invisible level, something was touched. The field has been cleared enough so that the voltage does not accumulate more. This does not mean that all conflicts are resolved there. Some continue. Others return later. But the pattern breaks. And breaking a pattern is always the first step towards something different is possible. Without realizing it, the other was asked to leave the rigidity, not by imposition, but by absence of attack. And this absence, paradoxically, is what is most disarming, because where there is no opposition, aggressiveness finds no mirror, and without a mirror, it dissipates, like mist in the sun. As something reorganizes into another, an equally profound transformation takes place inside you. And this perhaps is the quietest part of all, because nobody sees, nobody comments, but the body knows. The spirit recognizes. By using the phrase, you interrupt an old pattern, the pattern of reacting, to explain too much, of defending yourself as if you were always about to lose something. Instead, an unexpected feeling of stability emerges, as if, for the first time in that moment, you were standing in the center itself. Breathing deepens. The shoulders relax. The heart slows down. Not because the conflict is over, but because you left the current that fed it. This exit is not escape. It is alignment. You stop being pushed by emotions and start watching them pass, like clouds that cross the sky, without altering the sky itself. There is also an energy saving. Arguments tend to drain more than resolve. Every argument demands strength. Each defense consumes vitality. By not entering in this game, you preserve something precious, not just calm, but inner dignity, a feeling of not having betrayed oneself to win a momentary dispute. In this state, something curious happens. Even if the other person continues talking, you don't feel smaller. There is no urgency to prove your worth. Identity is not at stake. The ego rests. And when the ego rests, listening becomes cleaner. You hear better. Know to respond, but to understand what is really being said behind the words. This stance creates a rare type of strength, a force that is not imposed, but sustained. It is like a mountain that doesn't need to move to show that it's there. The conflict can continue around, but it no longer passes through you in the same way. Over time, this practice changes something deeper. You start to trust less reaction and more in presence, less in control and more in sensitivity. Realize that neither all silence is omission, and that some pauses are acts of care given to yourself. This care has a cumulative effect. Every time you choose not to fuel the conflict, something cleans itself inside. Old wounds no longer reopen automatically. Repeated stories lose strength, and little by little, you become someone who doesn't carry unnecessary tensions ahead. In the end, perhaps the greatest gift of this phrase is not what it does to others, but what it preserves in you. Your spiritual integrity, its clarity, your ability to cross difficult situations without fragmenting. When this happens, even amid the noise of the world, something remains intact. One internal silence, a firm axis. And it is from this place that any relationship, including with yourself, you can begin to heal. In the end, the phrase is not a trick. It is not a communication technique. It's not a strategy to come out on top. It is a reflection of something deeper. The conscious choice of preserve harmony when everything invites rupture. When you use it, you are not trying to control the other person or the outcome of the situation. You are simply taking responsibility for the field you inhabit, for the climate you create, for the type of presence he offers to the world, even, and above all, in moments difficult. There is a quiet wisdom in recognizing that not all conflict needs to be crossed with sharp words. Some ask for gentleness, others ask for silence, and some just ask that someone refuse to continue fueling the friction. That someone, it could be you. Over time, this posture turns into a path where strength does not, it comes from rigidity, but from flexibility, where respect is not demanded, but emanated, where the spirit finds passage even in charged environments. Maybe that's why this phrase works, because she doesn't try to change others. She changes the moment axis, and when the axis changes, everything that turns around finds new guidance. Using this phrase is remembering that you are not just a reaction, that there is a space between the stimulus and response, and that in this space lives something precious, the possibility of acting in according to what you want to preserve, and not just what was provoked. In the fast-paced world we live in, where conflicts multiply and repeat themselves, this choice is almost revolutionary, not because it's noisy, but because it's silent. Not for to impose, but to allow. Not by winning, but by not losing yourself. If you've made it this far, you might already realize that the true power of this phrase isn't in the words that compose it, but in the inner state that it reveals. A state of attention, of reverence to the moment, confident that not everything needs to be resolved now. It is in this state that the path opens, a path where relationships breathe, where the spirit does not fragment with each shock, where you can get through life with less weight and more clarity. If this type of look makes sense to you, sign up and keep walking with us along the path of the soul. Here, each step is an invitation to attentive silence, to harmony possible, and listening to the invisible that accompanies us. And perhaps the next time conflict arises, you will remember, What if what we call destiny is neither force nor chance, but just the whisper of the kami that accompany us since birth?